Hello, I'm Elvin Wilson, and I work at the original Pancake House. I've been sharing a lot of great information. In the last episode, we talked about the sour starter. We talked about the half batch recipe and how special it is to me at the original Pancake House in South Carolina, and how great it's been for us when we finally came into that recipe, and the benefits of the prep cook, the full-time prep cook, making the half batch recipe of sour starter when he works every day that he works, and why it's been beneficial for me. And I'm going to continue on sharing more knowledge and information so that it can one day be just as beneficial for you as it has for our store. Yes, the half batch recipe. I've been talking about it a lot, and there's a reason why I talk about it so much. And that's because when I first came into it, I'll never forget. I went to the owners, and I asked, could I have like 5 or 10 minutes of their time? And they said, sure. And we sat down, and I gave them a blueprint for what I believe was going to help grow the business. You know, I had thought about it for a long time, and when I finally came into it, I didn't say anything right away. When I finally found it and I saw it in the recipe book, I didn't say anything about it right away. But once I started messing around with it and I saw how great it was, I sat down with the owners and told them that I had a plan for growing the business, and this was my plan. And when I broke it down to them, they were on board with it. They said, yes, by all means, go for it. You know, because in the very beginning, when I first became a prep cook, we were making the buttermilk at the Pancake House, and we were separating the recipe. Once it was made, the full recipe, we were separating it into 3 containers. So if it's a 12-gallon recipe of buttermilk, and I'm separating it into 3 containers, I'm putting 4 gallons of buttermilk in 3 containers. And later I went back to study the recipe, and I realized that was the first mistake. That was the first thing that I came into when I first started prepping, and I started studying the recipe book when the owners turned me loose on prep. This was over 20 years ago, and they gave me the responsibility, a full-time responsibility of being the prep cook at the original Pancake House in South Carolina. That was one of the first things I noticed after reading the recipe, that the buttermilk should be separated into 4 containers and not 3. And I would always make the sour starter at the original Pancake House, and I couldn't figure out why I was making the amount of sour starter that I was supposed to be making, and I would always find myself throwing out a good bit of it. So if I did 2 to 3 batches a week, 2 to 3 full batches a week, I always found myself throwing away a good bit of it, and I didn't like that. I couldn't figure out why I was throwing away so much. And over time, after studying the recipe, I realized that the buttermilk, the full batch recipe for buttermilk was supposed to be separated into 4 containers instead of 3. So that was the first thing I noticed. And what we were doing was we were taking the 3 containers and following the normal recipe, which would mean now that we're separating it into 4 containers. And that was one of the first changes I made, not only for the original Pancake House in South Carolina, but also the 2 stores in Charlotte. Because when I became prep manager, I wasn't just prep manager of the original Pancake House in South Carolina. I was prep manager of all 3 stores that the ladies owned at the time. And I would visit those stores, the 2 stores in Charlotte, and share knowledge with the prep cooks. And, I would share all my knowledge, but not just the prep cook, but the cooks as well at the original Pancake House in Charlotte, both stores. That was one of the first things I came into. And when I started separating the buttermilk into 4 containers instead of 3, we started to use more of the sour starter. And I was really happy about that. I was happy about that because now I know that we're using the proper amount of sour starter in a full batch of buttermilk. Whereas if it was separated in 3 containers and we would follow the recipe, we were using less of what was needed for the full batch of buttermilk. And I was happy about that. I was happy that I came into that, and I was happy that I was able to make the changes because it made the pancake batter at not only the original Pancake House in South Carolina better, but all 3 stores that they own. It made it better. It made it better because we were using more of the sour starter, and that was great. That was great. But as far as coming into compliance with the health department and Department of Agriculture, as I gained experience over the years, I came into the half batch recipe, and the half batch recipe has worked wonders for me. It really, really has. And I'm going to share a tip that was given to me from Portland that made my life easier. And hopefully at your location, you're already doing this. And if not, then being that I came into this tip from Portland, now I'm able to share it with you because it's definitely made my life easier. Because you see, when we make the buttermilk has to age under refrigeration before we can even use it. It has to age overnight, and we let it do that, we let it do that. And then the next day, after you make the buttermilk and it's aged, there's a 2-step process that has to happen. And that 2-step process is done over the next 2 days after the buttermilk has been made and aged under refrigeration for 1 day. So if I make buttermilk today, I'll go in tomorrow, and anytime tomorrow when I arrive at work, I'm able to do step 1 to that buttermilk that I made today. I could not introduce step 1 to the buttermilk on the same day that I made it because it has to age, and that's very important. It's very important that it ages. We don't need to go into details why. If you work at the original Pancake House and you're a prep cook or a manager, then you already know the answer to that. I'm just sharing what I've come into and the tips that's been shared to me from Portland that has made my life easier. So tomorrow, I'll be able to introduce step 1, if I need to the buttermilk that was made today. Okay? So there's a 2-step process after the buttermilk has been made. So the buttermilk was made today. It's aging right now as we speak. Tomorrow, if I need to use that buttermilk, I can begin the 2-step process. Adding step 1 to the buttermilk tomorrow. After adding step 1, before I came into this tip from Portland, I would let that buttermilk sit another day. Because that's what the recipe asks you to do. Once that step 1 is added to the buttermilk, they want you to let the buttermilk stand overnight. And that's what I was doing. I was doing it by the book. And then that following day, I'm able to introduce step 2 to the buttermilk to get the buttermilk ready for the line. And once the buttermilk is ready for the line, I want to have that buttermilk used up within 24 hours. But for the Department of Agriculture, their biggest concern is, and this is what I came into on the last visit we had from the Health Department and the Department of Agriculture, they surprised me with something and brought me into an understanding of something I was unaware of. Because on that visit, and this was last year, 2025 in September, we had a visit from the Department of Agriculture, and they asked me something that they've never asked me in all the years I've worked for the company. Here it is, I'm confident. I feel like I got everything in order. I feel like everything is where it needs to be. I feel like I have all the information to present to the Department of Agriculture that's needed to meet requirements. And a question got asked to me, and the question was, I'm looking at your buttermilk, and it seems to be labeled correctly. However, I don't see a label where it tells me the expiration date of the sour starter that was added to the buttermilk when you made it. I'm like, wait a minute. Can you repeat that again, sir? I'm not understanding what you're telling me. Yeah, sure, I'll repeat it. The sour starter that was added to the buttermilk, when you added it to the buttermilk, what was the expiration date of that sour starter that was added to the buttermilk? I said, well, I could get that information for you. I can show you the batch of the starter that I used. He's like, yeah, sure, that's fine. But there needs to be a label on your buttermilk, okay? Alongside of your original label, there needs to be a label on the buttermilk with the expiration date of the sour starter that was added to the buttermilk. And I said, well, can you explain why? He said, sure. You make a batch of buttermilk, and it's good for 7 days. Okay. But once you introduce a sour starter to a buttermilk that is aged under refrigeration like it's supposed to, that buttermilk now becomes the shelf life of the sour starter that was added to it. So for example, if I made a buttermilk today, it's good for 7 days. But if I add a sour starter to that buttermilk the following day, and that sour starter expires within 3 days, now your 7-day expiration date on your buttermilk now becomes 3 days. And I was unaware of that. That was something brand new to me. But it made sense. It's not like it didn't make sense, but for so many years I felt like I was doing it right, and I was never asked by the Department of Agriculture, the Health Department, DHEC, I was never asked to label the buttermilk with the expiration date of the sour starter that was added. So they're coming into a better understanding of how to make the sour starter safer for customers. And now I've come into a better understanding of how to use the sour starter after all these years. And it's a great thing. And I'm so happy to receive that information, because here's why it makes sense. Let's say I'm making a batch of chicken salad, like I did today. I poach the chicken, I cool the chicken down, and I make my chicken salad. Well, I know that that chicken salad is good for 7 days. But however, if I didn't poach the chicken today, and I poached the chicken 4 days ago, but I made the chicken salad today with the chicken that I poached 4 days ago, I can't then go and say, okay, I made chicken salad today, I got 7 days. And I know I can't do that. And I learned this at ServSafe, But before I learned it at ServSafe, yeah, if I made a batch of chicken salad, it didn't matter if the chicken was cooked 3-4 days ago, I would give it 7 days. And I was wrong. So I came to a better understanding about that when I became ServSafe, when I got my certification for food safety. This was 15 years ago. I've been certified for over 15 years. When I got my very first certification 15 years ago, I came into that knowledge. And then my chicken salad was a whole lot better, because now I know that I need to poach chicken. And when I poach the chicken, or any chicken that has been cooked, if you're making a chicken salad, the expiration date is going to be the same expiration date as the chicken that was cooked. And now the same thing applies to the sour starter, and I didn't know that. I'm thinking that once I introduce the sour starter to the buttermilk, that the shelf life, extends based on the time the buttermilk was made. So if I added a sour starter to a buttermilk and that sour starter was 8 days old, when I know I can't hold sour starter past 9 days, but I'm thinking to myself, once I introduce it to the batter, I'm good to go. Once it's been introduced to the batter, then I don't need to worry about the expiration date of the sour starter. I can just focus on the expiration date of the buttermilk itself. And that's the understanding that I came into, and this is what the Department of Agriculture was trying to get me to understand. And I got it. I didn't get it right away, but you know, once I get called out on something, right away my whole brain is just analyzing the entire situation because I want to understand what it is they want me to do so that I can come in compliance. And it took a while, you know. I had to go home and think about that because, and the only reason why I had to go home and think about it is because I've been doing it this way for so long. And I've had multiple visits from the Department of Agriculture, the Health Department, DHEC, and I've never been asked to do that. So they're coming into a better understanding, and now they're bringing me into a better understanding, although I didn't like the way that they presented it to me. You know, basically he was talking to me like, and I had seen the same person before. I've had multiple visits by the same person from the Department of Agriculture, so I know him and he knows me. He was talking to me like, he asked me again. He was like, you know, where's the expiration date of the sour starter that was added to the buttermilk when you made it? Like, this is something that we had talked about before, when clearly it wasn't. This is the first time he's brought it to my attention. But if he's visiting other pancake houses around the world and visiting other restaurants and stuff like that, he may not have remembered that he didn't share that knowledge with me, because he didn't. But when he was talking to me like, okay, this is something we've talked about this, you know. Like, we shouldn't even be having this conversation. Like, I'm supposed to automatically already know this, and I didn't. So that caused a revisit, and I don't like that. You know, anytime you get a visit from the Department of Agriculture, that's the last thing you want, is for them to have to come back for any reason. You know, so that is where things got a little uncomfortable for me, because he made me feel a little uncomfortable only because he really made me feel like I didn't know what I was doing. But later, you know, when he did come back, he was a little more humble. He was a little more calm, because he realized that we had already met several times before, and I'm guessing that he realized that that wasn't something that we had talked about. So the revisit went a whole lot better than the first visit, which I can understand. He's working for the Department of Agriculture, you know what I mean? He's trained to be firm. I get it. You know, but for someone like myself who likes to do things by the book, made me feel a little uncomfortable. It made me, you know, but at the same time, I'm not knocking the Department of Agriculture, because I've learned so much. And I can still say to this day that these visits from the Department of Agriculture has made me a better manager and a better cook and a better prep cook. And I'm more knowledgeable now than I ever have been before when it comes to the sour starter and keeping the food safe at the original Pancake House in South Carolina. So I'm thankful for that. And so the big tip I came into, and there's so much to talk about, again, you know what I mean? I can only cover so much in this video, but we will talk more. We got a tip from Portland that made my life easier. Because as I said before, you know, I make the buttermilk, I let it age, I come back, next day I introduce step one. Once I introduce step one, I know I can't. Technically, during that time frame, I know I couldn't use that buttermilk. Once I introduce step one, I know I need to let that buttermilk stand. And I can't use it. And I did that faithfully for decades. And I would visit the other stores in Charlotte, and I could never get them to do it. For some odd reason, I could never get them to come into compliance with that. And the thing about it is, their visits from the Health Department and Department of Agriculture, it's a little bit more strict in Charlotte. So they were a little more lenient with us in South Carolina versus the two stores in Charlotte. But I couldn't understand why, if they were so lenient with the stores in Charlotte, why they were so challenged with the whole sour starter variants. Because We were more in compliance. I felt like we were more in compliance in South Carolina than they were in Charlotte. And their visits from the Department of Agriculture, they were more strict when it came to what they were required to do versus what we were required to do in South Carolina. I couldn't get it. And, you know, the biggest thing is that it's a challenge. It's not easy, you know. And if you have a full-time prep cook, you know what I mean, and he's not working full-time hours, that alone right there is a red flag. Because I work full-time at the original Pancake House in South Carolina, and I'm averaging 40, 45 hours a week. I'm averaging 45 hours a week. And that's me doing everything by the book, like I'm supposed to. You know, if there was a day where I went to work and got off in 8 hours, that was really, really good, you know. But most days I'm averaging 9 hours plus. You know, and that's me doing everything by the book, and that's me not being slow. I've been working for the company for a long time. I know what I'm doing. I'm consistent, and I do a good job. And you know, yeah, I'm able to pace myself. And I have a sense of urgency when it comes to prep or any other tasks I may be given at the original Pancake House. So, yeah, it's taking me. I'm full time, and I'm working full time hours. You know, but the tip that I came into from Portland was, and this wasn't even required by the Department of Agriculture. This was Portland. But I'm thinking that over time, the Department of Agriculture is probably going to want us to do this too. So I'm one step ahead of what the Department of Agriculture is asking us to do. Because all they want to know is the expiration date of the sour starter that was added to the buttermilk. That's all they want to know. And they want to be sure that you're not adding a sour starter that's about to expire to a buttermilk and allowing it to sit past its expiration. And we no longer do that at the original Pancake House. So we're in compliance with the health department. Here's the tip that made my life easier from Portland. And here it is. Once the sour starter is added to the buttermilk, once you add the sour starter to the buttermilk, meaning step one, for the best quality pancakes, to get the best quality pancakes that you can get, you want to use that batter within 24 hours. Okay, so what does that mean? That means, and I've analyzed it, and I'm studying it, and I'm still studying it, but this is what I've come into so far. And if I'm wrong, then I long to be corrected, you know, because I'm listening to the lady and the information that she's giving me, and I'm using the information that she's giving me, and it's made my life easier because in the beginning, I would make the buttermilk, and I would let it age. I would come in, I would add step one, I would let it stand. I'm not going to use it that day. And then the following day, I would add step two and then use it. And then during that time frame, once step two is added, that starts the timer for me for 24 hours. Whereas, here's the tip from Portland. Once step one is added to the buttermilk, you have 24 hours to use it to get the best quality pancake. And there it is. So, how did that make my life easier? Well, if I made buttermilk today, technically, if I go in there in the morning and I add step one, that buttermilk is on the clock. So, yes, let's say if I got there at 6 a.m. and I added step one, but I needed to use that buttermilk before the restaurant closes. Once the sour starter has been added to the buttermilk, it's on the clock, which means that I can go from step one to step two in the same day if I need to. Because once you've added the sour starter to the buttermilk, if you've only got 24 hours to use it, that doesn't mean you're gonna let it stand overnight and come in the next day to add step two, and then you only got a few hours left. That's not gonna work. So basically, what she was trying to tell me, you know, and I had to think about it. I'm like, okay, once the sour starter is added to the buttermilk, and I said this to myself 100 times before it finally clicked. Once the sour starter is added to the buttermilk, I got 24 hours to use it. So that alleviates the standing for step one. Although I do like to let it stand. So what I'll do is sometimes like this afternoon, you know what I mean? I added step one to a buttermilk that I'm going to use tomorrow, but I added step one later in the afternoon. If the restaurant closes at 2:30, I might have added that sour starter about 1 o'clock. So I know I have until 1 o'clock the next day to use it. But I'm going to assume how much buttermilk I'm going to use, but my assumptions are never going to be correct because I don't know the type of volume. I can only assume how much we're going to use. So when you do that, that means that I don't want, because I want the best quality pancake, I don't want to introduce the sour starter to the buttermilk like I did today. I added it at 1 o'clock. I don't want to introduce the sour starter to the buttermilk and then go past 24 hours, because if it does, then in my mind, listening to the tip that was given to me, I know that the quality of the pancakes aren't going to be the same, even though it may look the same. You know, if the tip was given to us and it says that if you want the best quality, you want to use it within 24 hours, then that's what I'm aiming for. You know, and I understand what she's saying is, you know, well, if you don't succeed, it's okay. It's not, we're not telling you to throw the buttermilk away, but if you want the best quality pancakes at your location, you want to strive for that. And that's what we're doing now at the Original Pancake House in South Carolina. I definitely strive for that. You know, and we're going to talk about this more, because I'm realizing that there's just one episode alone, just this one episode alone is not going to be enough. You'll hear this again, and you'll keep hearing it, you know, until someone leaves me a message in the comment section saying, I get it. Okay. But no, because it took me a while. It took me a while, but I have it now. And now that I have it, I feel better about it, and it's made my life easier. You know, basically what she's saying is, okay, steps 1 and 2, after the buttermilk has sat overnight, steps 1 and 2 can be done in the same day. Yeah, I mean, it has to, because if you only got 24 hours to use the buttermilk for the best quality pancakes, once the sour starter is added, it's on the clock. So if I added the sour starter today at 1 o'clock, that means I want to have that batter gone by tomorrow by 1 p.m. I want it gone. You know? So I'm not going to add step 1 to a whole bunch of buttermilk that I'm not going to be using. So I'm trying to narrow it down as close as possible, or even doing just enough where I know it's going to run out, to the point where I may need to do step 1 and 2 tomorrow to a buttermilk that I made yesterday. And there it is. Yeah. So if my pars on the weekend used to be anywhere from 12 to 14 containers, you know, and I'm in there on a Friday and I'm working, and I know I need at least 12 containers going into the weekend. That's not necessarily the case now. You know, that 12, the par of 12 containers of buttermilk just came down to 8. And I don't need to make as much. Yeah, yeah. Because the aging process has been nerfed. Yeah. So that made my life easier. Yeah. And I'm hoping that the tip that we got, and the young lady that gave us the information, I'm hoping that I can spend more time with her. I'm hoping that one day I get to meet this person and we get to share knowledge together. Because when I got the tip, it left me hungry for more. And I hope that day comes where I'll be able to get valuable information from great people that work in Portland, that have been doing this for a long time. That's a long-term goal for me, and I hope I can make that happen. But if you watched this video and you made it this far, I thank you for watching. I hope that what I shared today helps you become a better prep cook, or manager. And yeah. Thanks for watching. Peace.